Hello and welcome to Your Story, and in this video I'm going to be sharing the photographs and stories that you submitted to me as part of the What's Your Story photography challenge. At the beginning of this year I published a video in which I looked at some of my favourite photographs. Now this wasn't just a collection of my favourite photographs from the previous year, but I will look back through my entire catalogue of images spanning over a decade. And what I found by doing that process was that I found that some of the images or some of the photographs were vastly more important than others. Now that's not to say that they were miles better than some of the other photographs that I've taken, but they represented significant points in my journey as a landscape photographer. And that got me thinking, I bet a lot of photographers out there also have important images, ones that have really interesting stories attached to them. So at the end of that video, I asked if anyone who wanted to could submit a photograph and a story, and I would showcase them in a special video. Now over the last 4 to 6 weeks, you all have been very busy submitting your photographs, stories, and also video stories to me. So what I do want to say is thank you so much for everyone who's going to contribute to this video, and I really hope that everyone who watches this and looks at some of the photographs and the stories and the videos that people have been kind enough to submit, take some inspiration and learn something that will help them on their journey as a photographer. So without further ado, let's take a look at our first story. So first up to share his story is my good friend Chris Sale with this image and story about a photograph he took of a reservoir.
The image that I want to share with you is this one of Startops Reservoir near Marsworth in Buckinghamshire, which is actually where I grew up. I took this photograph at the start of 2007 when I'd only been doing photography for about a year. And the reason why it's so important to me is it's really the first photo that I was ever really proud of, proud enough to share with other people. In all the years that have followed, I don't think I've ever quite captured an image that I was so proud of. It has a very obvious subject that acts as a strong focal point. It's also a very simple composition. Finally, it's got nice, even, subtle lighting. And these are three things that I try to incorporate into my photography even today. This image is very important to me because it proved something to me, is that I could take half-decent photographs. And from there my passion built. It's such an important image, I think I'd go as far to say that if I didn't take that photograph, it's possible that I wouldn't be stood here today.
Next up we have Jane Lee, and Jane writes, my photography journey really started about 11 years ago one cold, frosty February morning when I managed to persuade my reluctant husband to drive me to Colmers Hill near Bridport. It was only about a 25-minute drive, but I wanted to be there for sunrise, which meant an early start and walking up the hill in darkness to be in a position before the sun was up. Although I joined Dorchester Camera Club with a friend a couple of years earlier, I was still fairly new to photography, and I have to admit that I didn't really know what I was doing. Anyway, after a bit of tweaking in Photoshop, I felt reasonably pleased with my picture, and the following year entered it into a competition organised by Dorset Wildlife Trust on the theme of Dorset trees. Much to my surprise, I won the photography section and was very excited to have my first picture published in the book The Great Trees of Dorset. Now let's take a look at this mountain image from Arne Kolstø. Arne writes, it had been the nicest of days as I ascended to the top. Some few hikers passed me on the way up, and when I reached the top, I soon became completely alone at the top and was the only one that had this spectacular view. The midsummer nights never become really dark, and I could stay and watch the sunset and the spectacular view over the mountain areas while the golden sun rays casted longer and longer shadows, and the north sky became golden and red. Then I could ascend in the midsummer night's blue twilight and find my tent before the sun rose again. And next up we have this image from Chris Martin, and he writes, this is a photo from Wastwater. We were in Windermere in November 2017 and intended travelling to Wastwater in Hardknot Pass to capture some lakeland vistas. The roads were icy, and after stopping at the foot of the pass to let a car go towards Windermere, we started to climb the hill but soon lost traction and slid backwards off the side of the road. After around 2 hours and virtually no passers-by, a couple of men came by and we were able to get our car back on the road and then led us on to the lower route to Wastwater. This photo was taken on a Canon 750D and shows one of the men in an attempt to add perspective to the area. The photo also reminds me of the fact that although you try to find the best viewpoints, you should also consider your safety. Now let's take a look at this image from Tony Green. Tony writes, this image was taken in the Peak District on the hills above Wild Boar Clough. Even the name conjures up a suitably desolate feeling. The temperature was -5, much lower than at my home only 30 miles away, and there was a driving wind which meant I could only stay about 10 minutes to get the shot before retreating to my car. This is a blended composition to get the detail in the shadow areas. It did modestly well in the club competition, but judges rarely appreciate landscapes or the effort required to capture them. But I was pleased with this early attempt at something serious, and have now gone on to earn an LRPS. Time for another video, I think.
Hi Julian, and thank you for letting me be part of your vlog. The photo that makes me feel sort of special about my photography journey is this photo here. This photo I actually waited 2 hours to try and get the light to do sort of as it's done. It did get better, but the wind picked up and I couldn't get my long exposure. The reason behind why I love this photo and why it feels like a big step in my photography journey, just before this, me and my wife decided to separate. And this was the first time I actually went out afterwards and managed to sit for so long and just clear my head and sit for a photo. When I was with her, it was always rush, rush, rush. This time, I actually sat and waited, and this was the first time I truly felt like I was a photographer, if you get what I mean.
And next we have Andy Chattaway with this panoramic image. He writes, "My story is not exciting, but it is interesting for several reasons. Firstly, I intended to take part in your Embrace the Grey challenge, so on a very grey day and in deep snow, I had gone to Mamtor in the peaks. On the way down, I slipped on some ice and damaged my spine. I had surgery to remove a broken piece. 1 year later, and with an insensibly heavy low pro, I achieved the personal goal to hike back up Mamtor. The weather was dramatic, and I made this 15 frame stitched panorama of Edale Valley." Now let's take a look at this image from Mark Pritchard. Mark writes, "All my life I have enjoyed photography, mostly just snapshots on holidays and trips away, but only started to use a full frame camera a year ago. This shot was taken at Govrevi Lighthouse in Cornwall. I've been watching many YouTube videos which inspired me to have a go, so I looked at the weather, got there early and chose my composition. I was there about 3 hours, which was time well spent. Watching the sun go down right on the coast was just the most peaceful, wonderful experience I had ever had. I realised this feeling is what it's all about. You could bottle it, you'd be a very rich man." The photo was taken with a very cheap lens, but even if I had had a good photo, it wouldn't have mattered, as the experience was just so pleasing to me. So this year, it will all be about getting out early and practicing as much as I can. Next up, we have this photograph from Julian Elliott, and Julian writes, "I've been trying to get this photograph for a few weeks, but I've been denied access to the building on the basis that I'd had a photography backpack and tripod. After going down to complain to the town hall, I was eventually given permission. However, once arriving back at the building, I was told I couldn't go up because I'd have to bring my own equipment. Assuming that they were talking about camera equipment, I was actually wrong. They were talking about climbing equipment. So I went down to the local store and did a little bit of quick rental and got myself some climbing equipment, and I got taken up to the roof of the famous Hotel de Ville for a few hours to get shots like the one you see here." Time for another video, and here we got Simon Byrne talking about a trip to Wistman's Wood.
My story is one of magic and mystery. Last winter I visited Wistman's Woods on Dartmoor for the first time. A very eerie place and very hard to photograph. But those mystical forces in that ancient oak forest were on my side that day, because it started to snow, allowing me to capture something magical, something you don't often see. I've returned a couple of times since then, but come away with nothing. Landscape photography for me is all about experiences, and that day on Wistman's Woods was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I felt an ancient yet calm presence there, and I still feel it every time I look at one particular photo that I captured.
And now we have this image from Dennis Blackford, and he writes, "At a small local club, a small number of us tend to generally take all of the prizes. We have digital SLR cameras in common, and 2 of the members have been professional photographers, whereas well over half of the other members use point and shoot cameras. In this day and age, too much emphasis appears to be put on photographic gear as a main component of a good photograph, and less of the person behind the camera. This has very much been in evidence in all of the online groups. I have been a member of over the years. Hence it was my ambition to show that a picture taken by a basic point and shoot camera with minimum processing was capable of a winning picture. This photograph from 2015 was taken in Plymouth, Devon, and although not one of my best pictures, this one, taken on a little Panasonic Lumix pocket-sized camera that cost me £25 second hand, fulfilled the ambition, and I had the winning first prize in the shape, form and silhouette category that year. And now we have this image from Mark McFeeters, and he writes, "This image was captured while walking our dog in the Beer Forest in Hampshire in the United Kingdom. I uploaded this to my Flickr photo stream. Some years later I was contacted by the Norwegian Opera House as they wanted to use my image as a backdrop to an opera. Subsequently we travelled out to Norway to see what they had done with my image." Time for another video, and this time is from Jamie Overland.
Hi Julian, and thanks for this challenge. I think I found an image that was a turning point in my journey. It was about 3 years ago when I got back into photography, and more specifically started to learn more about landscape photography and how to process your images in Lightroom and Photoshop. So I took an image, really happy with it, so happy that I entered it for a local calendar competition run by a local magazine, and I got in in August. Great, I thought. Got it back, looked at the image, compared it to the other images in the calendar, and straight away I could see what I did wrong. Let's have a quick look. You can see the image is far too processed. That's the main thing wrong with this image. The composition is mediocre, the sky looks dreadful, the colours are far too saturated. And it was at that point when I compared it to the other images and started to look on social media, I thought I need to stop what I'm doing on my processing and just make sure my processing reflects what I saw in camera, and not try and make more of an image than was actually there on the day. So that was a turning point for me. Since then, hopefully I've been a lot more careful with my processing. My landscape photography journey's developed no end. I've started to vlog now on YouTube, which is fantastic. I really think I've learnt so much from the early days of getting into landscape photography. So yeah, thanks for the challenge. See you soon.
And now let's take a look at this image from Jeff Ogden. Jeff writes, "I chose this particular shot from 2013 as it represents a beginning and an attempt to make a more creative composition. Muir Beach, just north of San Francisco, is about 30 minutes from my home, so I headed out in the late afternoon on a clear February day and had a wander. No planning, no checking weather, sun position, etc. Lacking a real subject is hardly a great shot. I did have the good sense to use a tripod, but I didn't own any filters. Despite all this, I lucked out with some nice colour, and I remember sensing for the first time the importance of interest in light. Fast forward to early 2018 and I finally had a free time to spend on the photography, and I have been working on it ever since. If I could go back in time to that day at Muir Beach, I think I could actually make something from that beautiful light." And next up we have this image from Greig Millen, and he writes, "This is the very first image I took in my first attempts at landscape photography. It is also my first attempts at editing. Spent a long time procrastinating and not getting it out there, but thankfully I did, and I know some might think this is not a great image, but I was delighted with it, and to me it dismissed all the concerns I had. It's definitely inspired me to get out there and take more images." Time for another video, and this time it's Sam Bose, and he's going to talk about his image that he took in the Brecon Beacons.
Hi Julian. The image which I've chosen to illustrate my photographic story is this image which I took during a trip to the Brecon Beacons. I took this image from the top of Penny Fan, and I actually took it whilst recording one of my early YouTube videos. And for that video I set myself a challenge of just taking one single image. This was a really useful exercise because it made me have to think a lot harder about the composition before pressing the shutter release. And that's an approach which, ever since taking this image, I've always had in the back of my mind whenever I've been doing photography. So I really feel like this image marks a key turning point in my photographic story, and represents a point where I started to change the way that I do landscape photography.
And now we have this image from Helen Higgs, and Helen writes, "This was the first image I ever took where I had a clear vision of the end product before I took the first shot. My usual approach was spray and pray, and sadly occasionally still is. We had just arrived at our weekend camping spot, and I stepped out of the camper onto the edge of a huge field of evenly planted unripe wheat. Every so often there were a few rogues that were taller than the rest, and this group were just feet from where I stood. Everything about the image, including the name, jumped out at me, and I had an instant plan. narrow depth of field, square format, black and white. I set the camera for the first 2 but didn't think about setting the colour option. But hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. It turned out exactly as I had intended and it got me my first 10 at my local camera club. Looking at it now, I don't like the processing and I can see I've learned a lot in these 4 years, but it was a real step change and brings back some good memories. Let's take a look at this image from Klaus Bernhard. Klaus writes, I took this image in one of my favourite national parks. I had been to this moor many times but never had the right light. Once again it seemed that I got up early for nothing. A thick cloud cover left the sun no chance. I wanted to dismantle and had already removed the camera from the tripod. There was suddenly a light fog and the sun showed, very timid. This created this soft light. I think the slightly pink sky fits so well. You're rarely so lucky, so I chose this picture. Nothing is free, you just have to wait. And last but certainly not least is my very good friend Gareth Danks, and he's going to tell us a story about an image he took in Wales.
Hey, welcome to my kitchen, so I'm not on the side of a mountain. Today I'd like to talk about a photograph that was really important to me when I took it, and it's still really important to me now, and it's this one in the Ogden Valley in Snowdonia. And the reason it's important to me is it's because it was the first time I actually knew how to plan for a shoot. I knew when to go. I'd visualised the image. I knew when I'd need to be there. I knew I wanted it in the snowy scene. I knew where I wanted the light to be. I understood a lot more about composition. I'm still very much in the early days, but I understood a lot more about composition. So when I got there, I knew exactly how to balance the photograph. And I just felt that when in the use of filters, I knew what filter I'd need. I knew the duration of the shutter, as opposed to just being any slow shutter. I knew exactly which shutter speed I wanted to use and which aperture would work best for the image. So I was really pleased when I got back. It's the first time, I suppose, I looked at the camera and thought, do you know what, everything that I visualised was on the back of the camera. So I was really pleased, and it gave me that excitement. It gave me the encouragement to think and the belief in myself that I thought, do you know what, this isn't a fluke. I planned this. This is what I wanted. I'd invested in good filters. You know, I'd invested in good walking boots, and I'd gone up there and I took myself out of my comfort zone. And literally, I was so excited when I got home. I couldn't wait to edit the photograph. So yeah, really pleased. It's a good photograph. It's obviously very well. It's a very popular photo spot with a lot of photographers, but I don't think that matters. I think it's just because it's yours. You've made it, you've taken it, you've created it. And I think in the early days of when I literally didn't really know much about landscape photography, it was quite an achievement to be able to capture the scene exactly as I wanted. And it's one of the photographs as well that when I looked at it on the computer, I don't actually think I made any mistakes with it, which is like, you know, normally you're cropping the life out of an image because you think, why was I stood there? Why didn't I go a bit closer? Why didn't I use this lens? Why did I, you know, but I got everything right in camera, and that gave me the confidence to think, do you know what, you can take this seriously now. You really can start to progress. So if it wasn't for that one photograph, I think I probably would have never had the inspiration to sort of look for other images that I wanted to create, and actually give me that belief. So yeah, that's a really important image to me.
Well, that's it. That's everyone's stories. I do hope you enjoyed either watching those video clips or listening to people's stories. Was there an image or a story that's inspired you? Did you get something from this video? Did you learn something? Is it something you can help you with your photographic journey? I thought there was a great selection of images and stories there, from competition winners to just general moments in life. I really enjoyed gathering everyone's photographs and stories together and sharing them with you in this video. If you did have a favourite video clip or story or photograph, please do let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested in seeing a bit more of these people's work, where they've left me social media details, I'll pop those in the video description below. But that's it from this video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.